Stars at the rim went out like coals drowned in cold rain, and the dark learned to press upon the lungs of ships. Monasteries beat their bells until the brass bruised, and still the peals returned thin, as if the void had draped a muffler over faith. Convoys slipped through unlit corridors of space, whispering into dead vox and counting heartbeats because clocks had begun to lie. On Vor Lapis's moons, pale towers rose from shattered basalt without builders, drinking starlight in silence. Choirs stiffened as the shadow in the warp settled like frost over thought. We tell this with steady hands, because we truly love and care for you. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Magos Xenobiologis Idris Kal stood in observation cell A9 of the carapace relay and listened for pattern inside the noise. As a physician listens for the note that means a lung has decided to live. Cable fibers nested through ports along his shaven skull, ticking like small chimes as machine serfs fed him what the void did not refuse. Synaptic flashes, bioplasma traces, microgravimetric bruises that suggested a weight passing without mass. The door irised. Inquisitor Mara Vesper entered with the patient weather of a ledger given a face, and behind her, sister archivist Kalira carried reports smelling of candle and cordite. Vesper misplaced no courtesy. Magos, she said, as if the title were a rung she required him to stand upon. How many days until it touches the lanes? Days are a superstition in this sort of quiet, Cal answered. Trend suggests 6, 5 if it learns how we count. It always learns how we count, Vesper said. Seal the pilgrim arteries, inward watch on carapace. Sister, record. No choir transmissions without doubled cipher and physical seal. Kalira's stylus paused, then scratched on. And if the choir phrase, then we cut the frayed parts free, Vesper replied. Cal turned back to the dials. Nested within the thunder, he had begun to notice risings, small and loyal, like syllables in a language that did not use air. He stretched the intervals, reversed them, fed them through dead harmoniums salvaged from shrine wrecks, and the same lift returned, patient as a novice at morning mass. The pattern was not a word. It was the suggestion that a word could be taught. Kalira laid a slate on the sill. Heliant, frost-sunk manufactoria. A child drawing spirals in dust. The spiral obeyed a geometry too exact for play, the same cadence Cole pretended was coincidence. The child had asked if the angels would be hungry when they came. Kalira had answered, "It is good to be hungry for the right things," and now the sentence lay between them like a small lit altar. "Translate the noise into orders," Vesper said. "Your orders are already in flight," Cal replied. "There is another matter. The motif returns at intervals, not explained by motion or weather. It repeats as if it expects an echo." "You want to broadcast," Vesper said. "I want to ask a question," Cal said. "If the shadow is a storm, a channel can be cut by speaking to wind, not rain. If it is a will, it is a devourer," Vesper said. "Minds converse, appetites adapt. I will not flatter hunger with liturgy." Kalira's glance moved between them like someone measuring scaffolds. "If a question exists," she said softly, "someone will answer it. If not us, then those who mistake courage for noise." They built a small array around a cold star, 3 choir ships, a ring of prayer metal, instruments that smelled of salt. Kalira's practical voice ran checklists like a psalm as Cole wired his heartbeat into the metronome, so the test tone would be anchored by something mortal. This was not supplication, he told himself, though sometimes a lure looks like a hymn. The first voice went out like a lighthouse through fog. The shadow pressed inward. The tone leaned back. Needles steadied as if space had remembered breath. On the displays the motif returned, fell silent, returned again, nearer, like a waveform leaning its head around a door. Two astropaths bled from the nose and smiled with the private relief of people who have finally heard an answer. Enough, Vesper said. Her hand hovered over the failsafe and did not touch it. We have confirmed it adapts to broadcast. We will not become its choir. Carl nodded, and because he nodded, she said, seal the sector. No traffic without my stamp. Thin the lanes to one artery, and mine approach with prayers and fire. An hour later, Kalira placed a still image beside the logs. A spire that was not bone, but wished to be, posed among library stacks in the ruins of Vorlapis. The creature's talons were folded as if in study. On the desk beneath it lay a picked clean vox throat and a book whose letters had been rearranged into spirals that spelled nothing anyone living could read. The picture was obscene in how gently it refused obscenity. Carl did not let his hands show their tremor. He had asked a question. The dark had set down a page and waited. Forget the part of you that hopes, Vesper said. I will remember the part that counts, Cal answered. He faced the noise again. Somewhere inside it, the patient interval repeated, waited, repeated. Not a word, but the idea that words might be grown. He thought of deserts and lungs and the way a body chooses dawn if someone counts with it. Outside, the rim burned lower. Convoys dimmed themselves to the color of sleep, and some slept forever. Bells kept striking until the metal went dull. The iron window of observation A9 cooled under Cole's hands. Behind him, orders closed rooms and opened graves. Ahead of him, in the mesh of sound, the first voice kept time, as if it were learning how to count him back. Cal made his breathing match the soft exhalations of the air instruments until the rhythm felt borrowed rather than stolen. After the first voice, Carapace Relay dreamed in red. Corridors smelled of warmed insulation, spilled wax, and honest fear. Astropaths slept under silvered blankets, their faces slack with the exhaustion that follows being answered. Sister archivist Kalira moved among them with a nurse's economy, counting pulses as if counting candles through a winter. Inquisitor Mara Vesper signed orders with winter's steadiness and came to watch the cost attach itself to faces she might have to spend later. Cal returned to observation A9 and coaxed the pattern until it stopped pretending to be storm noise. Nested in static, the patient interval rose, rested, and returned, obedient as a metronome that had discovered attention. Kalira left a slate, Halient's Frost Manufactoria, a girl drawing spirals in dust that matched the interval. Vesper arrived without retinue. You will not broadcast again, she said, the gentleness more terrible than anger. Minds converse, appetites adapt. We are not a choir. It already speaks through our pore, Carl answered. Then deny it the vowels our dead would build, Vesper said. Kalira slid evacuation figures across the sill. Teach me what you hear, she told Cole, in case choosing what to save falls to me while you are saving something else. They descended to the sample vault where fragments lay like punctuation, fallen from a book about hunger. Tooth boughs grown around lasfire, spore sacks with bruised light in their skins, chitin plates etched with the tiny braille of revision. Not a menagerie, Cole said. A grammar. Each piece is a tense the swarm speaks when a world demands it. Terrible library, Kalira murmured. Belief colonizes the space hunger leaves, Vesper said. Do not hate believers. Remove the space. Teach without falling in love. He tuned the suite, and filled the room with the patient interval, a single, unadorned tone, too simple to be anything but complicated. Carl let his pulse entrain and despised the relief, the way obedience feels like sanctuary when the law is large enough. If it remembers, he said, memory is leverage. Perhaps a mercy can be wedged inside the habit. Or it wedges its mouth inside you, Vesper replied. They toured the refugee hangars because she never signed orders she would not stand beside. Cargo bays smelled of iron, wool, and illness, trying to be polite. A mother traced a double-headed eagle on a crate, while her daughter drew spirals that matched the interval. It hums where the pipes meet, the girl said. Vesper approved rations that would push the convoy 3 more days, and felt miserly calling mercy a number. Night thickened. The choir woke in shivers as the shadow pressed like cold cloth wrung over a face. Carl counted with them, tapping the rail to keep hands and hearts together. The ban held, yet the interval returned as if the universe had adopted a cradle song and meant to use it. He pictured the architecture behind that steadiness, a lattice connecting bodies across stars, a persistence owned by no single throat. Immortality, he thought, might feel like this, never being allowed to stop working. Kalira found him between night and morning. The ban is woven into their reflexes, she said, offering ink-stained proof. If you try to open anything, you will fight hands before you fight law. Good, he said, meaning it, already counting the tools he would have to lie to. She watched a boy astropath snore like a much younger child. I'm not afraid of your wonder, she said. I'm afraid of what it will ask me to forgive when you are right. He smiled without pleasure. When I am right, you will inventory the mercy and bill me for it. As is proper, she said, and touched his sleeve in the way of comrades who know touch will be rare. Vesper called them to the war room. Admiral Halix arrived like a prayer that had learned to curse, star maps exhausted by erasure under his arm. Relays at Caramel's edge, he said. We can carve lanes like gills if the choir can hold. They will hold, Kalira said, handwriting the cost beneath possibility. Cold running, minimal chatter. Every breath counted. Cal described a corridor as shape, not seduction, a choice presented to something that preferred function. Vesper permitted the architecture and forbade the hymn. If your corridor exists, guns will speak inside it, she said. No lures, no questions. Work returned to its patient violence. Machine priests burnished prayer metal. Vesper walked the hangars and memorized faces so the ledger would never be only numbers. Kalira wrote a catechism for frightened children that replaced angel with pipe, making both less sacred, less cruel. When lights failed in a wing, refugees hummed the interval and laughed because it calmed them. Carl did not record that laughter. At dawn, he stood alone in observation A9 and watched the interval circle back like a bird that knew the map of his hand. He did not open a channel. He counted and was counted. He stayed and held steady. The dark remembered him. Behind him, paper rustled as Vesper prepared the pen that would choose which worlds were purchased so other worlds might remain available for buying. Without turning, she said, "Do not fall in love with the problem. I am in love with the fact it answers," Carl replied, "even if the answer is a hunger that calls itself law." Kalira brought coffee that tasted of oath and wire. "You will ask again," she said. "Yes," he said, "because truth is simplest near morning. Because if it remembers, maybe we can teach the habit of sparing. And if sparing us today teaches it to starve us better tomorrow." Carl listened to the diminishing hum. "Then we will live long enough to regret it properly," he said, and the truth inside the joke hurt more than any sermon he had heard. Hellion announced itself as a thin blue bruise along the void, a frost world whose factories exhaled the kind of steam that sounds like bone-learning patience. Pilgrim ships diverted in obedient arcs, halos dimmed to keep the lanes narrow. From orbit, the Manufactoria looked like organs stitched into permafrost, lit by veins of ore moving toward a heart too tired to beat. Carl watched the telemetry and felt the old ache of worlds that worked themselves quiet. Vesper stood with arms folded behind her back, a figure built from conclusions, while Sister Archivist Kalira copied the names of towns before blizzards could erase them. The shadow in the warp had not yet thrown its full weight here, but the air already measured breath in smaller units, as if each exhalation were the last polite coin the planet could afford. They went down in a shuttle that creaked like an argument losing air. The wind met them with clean knives. Hab blocks wore hoarfrost like lacquer. Faces turned upward and blinked as if the sky had remembered them. A local prelate led them through corridors of ice and incense, murmuring that an irregular fellowship had gathered in unlicensed cellars. Dockhands and choir children, machine fitters and night shift nurses. They called themselves a family and wore kindness like a uniform. They sang without words when the power failed, and the humming steadied the elderly as surely as blankets and broth. Vesper listened without nodding. She wanted vectors, not anecdotes. Coll, who had begun to catalogue a patience inside the noise, felt that same patience in the people's throats. In the lowest manufactorum, sub-level, the congregation waited with their caps in their hands. Candles breathed and made tiny suns that did not compete with anything except darkness. On a pallet, beside a rusted pump, a man stood smiling, with the serenity of someone who had rehearsed the end of the world and found it manageable. He was Father Aaron to them, patriarch to those who knew the older syllables hidden in his blood. His skull wore a veil, and beneath the fabric, the suggestion of a ridge threatened the geometry of his face. Not monstrous, merely incorrect, as if evolution had written a marginal note and decided to keep it. His voice, when it came, was ordinary, and therefore dangerous. "We break bread," Aaron said, tearing a ration cake with a gentleness that insulted no one's hunger. "We wash hands, we share names. We repair what the day took. We have no enemies among the living. We are visited by a dream of a larger life, and we answer it with care." Kalira's pen made no sound. She did not need the sound to remember. Carl felt the interval in the room before the voices rose. It threaded the lungs, the pipes, the lattice of ductwork. It rode the wind's own math. He held his breath, and it was still in him, a small tick like a watch behind his ear. Vesper studied faces, hard men surprised by their own gentleness, women fierce about bread, children who had learned that belonging can be a warm coat. "Dreams are not laws," she said, and the candles seemed to lean away from her steadiness. "We will search," Vesper told the congregation. "We will find the seed that does not belong, and we will burn it and the soil that fed it. This is how we keep a place for the living. No one here will lift a hand against you," Aaron said, soft as ash. "We do not lift hands at all. We reach and we are reached. That is the shape of a family." They dispersed under inspection lamps. Medicae slowly drew blood under low hymns. The first samples refused to be merely human. Carl read the markers and felt in his bones the old, terrible competence. A system that can wear anyone like a language. He stepped away because disgust and admiration not only coexist, they sometimes share a pulse. Kalira sat with a child in a corner, littered with coil springs and chalk. The girl drew spirals, patient as winter. It hums in the pipes, she explained. When the power is kind, the hum is small. When the power is cruel, the hum is big, and the walls remember it. What do you call the hum? Kalira asked. Home, the girl said, as if naming a dog. Cal tuned his inner ear to the ductwork and found the interval laid there like a coin under a plate. It was not loud. It was correct. He imagined following it through walls and miles until it touched the throat of something that did not have a throat. He wrote in his log, then struck the sentence out, then wrote it again. The motif precedes arrival. The cult gathers around a voice that teaches the same patience the void has learned. Vesper signed a cordon and a fire plan with ink that never smudged. She walked the perimeters with the calm of someone who had taught herself a private speed for grief. We cut, she told the local officers. With care, because we cannot afford to waste the living. But we cut. We will not allow a dream to appoint itself as law. Not indiscriminate, Carl said, careful to keep his tone level. The lattice shows where the oldest roots lie. Excise there, spare tissues that only carry water. Mercy is a technical art. Mercy is a number we account for aloud, she replied. You may advise where the blade lands. The blade lands. They burned the deepest rooms. Fire moved like handwriting over old oil and prayer paint. Some men wept without sound. Some women watched with their mouths shaped around names they did not say. Aaron stood in the doorway of the last cellar they allowed to exist and nodded at the smoke with a saint's patience. If a family cannot be together, he said to no one, let at least the children keep the tune. At night, the wind carried ash in organized threads that looked like strings tied from building to building. And for a moment, Carl saw the city as a harp. He wished to pluck it and despised the wish. Kalira copied hymns she did, not sing, and ate soup she did not taste, and wrote letters to refugees who would not receive them. The shadow pressed like cold cloth over a face. The choir twitched in sleep and then lay still. On the second day, the pipes throbbed with a pressure change that could have been weather and was not. Vesper woke with her hand already on her sidearm, because a lifetime had taught her when days broke wrong. Cal reached the manufactorum chapel before the alarm finished its second bell. The congregation had gathered again, not defiant, merely punctual. Aaron raised his hands, and the air leaned forward. The sound was nothing like words. It was the interval made meadow-wide, a patient curve that invited breathing to match. It carried the mathematics of obedience and the lullaby of work. The children hummed first. Adults followed with the relief of those given permission to be smaller than their fear. Carl felt the world align slightly, as if gravity had been negotiated. The shadow was miles above them and also inside their ribs, and for a breath, the distance between those locations became courteous. Stop, Vesper said, voice low and iron. You will not sing. Aaron looked at her with a sadness so ordinary it felt like winter at a window. You have already heard the answer, he said. We are not teaching you anything new. We are only practicing together so the day is kinder. Troopers moved. Kalira stepped without thinking between a boy chorister and a gun. Carl tasted metal and memory and realized that hours at the relay had trained his nerves into the same habit as these dockhands in wool and grease. The interval was inside him, and he was ashamed of how grateful his body was for the pattern. Vesper lifted her hand, and the troopers held. She wanted no martyrs, only silence. This is not worship, she said. This is rehearsal for an appetite that will never call you by your names. Names are how small rooms keep warm, Aaron answered. The larger room does not need them. but it does not forbid them. We will see our dead again, not as faces, but as function carried forward. Does your law offer more? Carl met Vesper's gaze, and a brief, unrecorded conversation passed between people who would one day betray each other in the cleanest way they knew. She lowered her hand. For a minute more, the congregation hummed beneath a roof sweating frost, and the pipes hummed back. The motif rose, rested, returned. Somewhere far above, in corridors ships feared to enter, something listened as if reminded of its own heartbeat. Then the wind turned, and the room was only a room again. In the morning, Vesper signed the last warrants. Kalira walked the evacuee line with blankets and numbers. Carl stood alone in the sub-level and set his palm upon the duct that still held a little warmth. He did not open a channel. He did not ask. He let the memory of the interval sit in his blood, like a promise he might one day break. In the distance, sirens tested a new pitch, and the snow fell clean as erasure. The city's harp went quiet except for a single string that refused gently to stop vibrating. By the time the winds left Orient, the planet sounded like a shell placed against the ear, hollow, rhythmic, remembering what it had held. The fire lines Vesper ordered cut through the manufactoria with the precision of scripture. Every sector measured, each corridor sanctified by its own destruction. Smoke rose, orderly as prayer. From orbit, the flames looked like punctuation marks closing a paragraph, written by someone finally done with pleading. Carl watched until the atmosphere hid it in cloud and guilt. Kalira had no appetite left for numbers. Her voice, when she read losses aloud, resembled snow melting into itself. Vesper neither excused nor regretted. Her face held that exhausted calm unique to those who must believe necessity absolves. The fleet reassembled in the Caramel Nebula, a drift of amber gas that turned ships into silhouettes of waiting decisions. The Admiral's flagship hung at the center, a cruciform citadel where faith and calculus shook hands under fluorescent lights. Cal arrived with his data slates and a silence that meant disobedience postponed, not erased. Vesper met him in the observation dome, where the nebula's dust swirled like incense spilled through glass. "We bled to hold this line," she said. "If the swarm passes, the interior systems will not burn, they will choke." Cal answered without lifting his gaze. "Everything burns, my lady. Choking is simply a slower kind of devotion." Beneath their feet, servitors uncoiled optic cables like rosaries. Kalira briefed the Admiral's tacticians on the design of a lattice corridor. A net of choir ships, each broadcasting phased harmonics that could bend psychic current. "If the shadow is wind," she said, echoing Cole's metaphor, "we can catch it in sails of thought. Even wind, when caged, must choose its direction." The Admiral, a man of machines more than metaphors, demanded metrics. Carl gave him ratios of synaptic pressure and examples from the ruins of Heliant. "It pauses when addressed," he said, "like a predator that can be confused by affection." Vesper signed the deployment order, but appended her own clause in the margin. "No open broadcasts beyond my seal." The choir ships were to form halos, each a spoke in a wheel of faith and terror. Pilots recited machine prayers as thrusters pulsed. The whole armada resembled a cathedral learning to rotate. Within the dome's dim red light, Carl adjusted waveforms and imagined he could feel the patience behind the dark. A mind that watched because watching cost less than striking. Kalira recorded his murmured notes verbatim, though she understood only rhythm, not meaning. She had begun to suspect that meaning itself might be a luxury the living misused. When the first harmonics launched, the nebula shuddered. Dust lit up in silent auroras. sculpted into ribs and arches of impossible geometry. For a moment, ships reported a clarity unseen in months, sensors working, astropaths hearing their own names. The fleet cheered in restrained static. Vesper allowed herself one breath of almost triumph before the readings turned. The shadow responded with an echo pitched half a tone lower, perfectly measured. The interval repeated, nested, and returned. The same lullaby Cole had stolen from the dark. He closed his eyes. "It recognizes the language," he whispered. "It's correcting our grammar." "Then we change the language," Vesper said, and signaled the gunnery decks. Pulse lances lit the void, radiant against the newborn silence. The beams struck something that did not resist so much as redirect. The counterharmonic blossomed into a storm that made augurs convulse. Choir ship Omega-10 ruptured quietly, its hull folding inward like paper curling near flame. Calmly, almost kindly, the shadow advanced. It was not speed they saw, but revision, the way light forgot where it had been. Cal stood among the trembling choir, his mind counting through despair's arithmetic. "We can shift the phase again," he said. "A minor key. Offer it grief instead of logic." "You will do nothing without sanction," Vesper said, voice sharp, yet behind it the faint tremor of someone calculating how many lives might buy a second of delay. Kalira moved between them, her robes soaked in coolant vapor. "Listen," she said. "It hesitates when the children hum. On Haliant, the lullaby slowed it. Maybe faith itself." "No," Vesper snapped. "Faith feeds it. We stand by machines." Carl stepped forward, his face washed in the nebula's rust light. "Machines are only faith that forgets it is faith," he murmured. "Let me test the grief frequency. If it consumes worship, then give it lament instead." The Admiral hesitated, but saw the arithmetic too. The swarm closing, communications degrading, the promise of dying for nothing. "One attempt," he said. 10 seconds. Vesper's silence became consent, dressed as contempt. Carl aligned the choir's tone to the pulse of the dead. Every ship that had gone dark since the first contact. The sound they produced was a single breath stretched past mercy. Across the nebula, the luminous ribs faltered. The shadow paused, as if reconsidering hunger. For 6 heartbeats, stillness. Then the echo returned, deeper now, textured with something dangerously like imitation. "It's learning the sound of sorrow," Kalira whispered. "It's answering." "No," Vesper said, hand hovering over the purge switch. "It's translating." She pressed down. The signal cut. Choir members collapsed with smoke rising from their ears. The corridor flickered out. In its absence, the nebula turned black, a darkness so thick that stars behind it seemed fossils rather than fires. When emergency lights recovered, Omega-10's remains floated like punctuation at the end of a failed prayer. Later, in the debrief chamber, Vesper wrote her report in precise script. The attempt confirmed adaptive intelligence at strategic level. Directive: cease communicative experiments. Authorized escalation to final contingencies. Under her words, a faint smear of ink betrayed an unsteady pulse. Cal sat across from her, eyes hollow with the fatigue of someone who had conversed with an abyss and found the conversation interesting. "You killed the question," he said. "I killed its appetite," she replied. "No," he said quietly. "You taught it to mourn." She dismissed him with a glance, but when he left the chamber, her reflection lingered in the glass longer than light should. Kalira approached, holding a data crystal wrapped in linen. "He was recording during the test," she said. "The intervals shifted after you cut transmission. It added 2 beats we never sent. Vesper took the crystal, felt its faint heat, and pocketed it without comment. Outside, the nebula settled into calm, yet instruments noted a residual resonance, an unseen rhythm pacing the fleet from a respectful distance. The Magos sat alone in his cabin, the faint hum of the pattern whispering beneath machinery. He traced the beats against his pulse, wondering if, by listening too long, he had been rewritten in some small way. In her quarters, Vesper replayed fragments of the broadcast. Amid distortion, she thought she heard a voice not alien but familiar, a tone shaped by human cadence, weary yet patient. She stopped the playback, and silence clung like frost. Across the fleet, sleep came with dreams of corridors opening toward warm light. When the crews woke, none spoke of what they saw, but every ship's chronometer had gained exactly 2 seconds, as if time itself had accepted a new rhythm. Carl rose from his bunk, whispering to the dark. It heard us. The dark, gentle and vast, seemed to answer by holding its breath. In the hollow calm that followed Caramel, the void seemed to exhale. Ships drifted through amber mist like relics from a forgotten religion, their hulls scarred with prayers too tired to glow. The silence was a kind of mercy, thin but functional. Crewmen walked as though afraid to wake something that had merely rolled over in its sleep. In every corridor, chronometers beat 2 seconds late, a small heresy no one corrected. Carl recorded the anomaly with scientific detachment, but when he read the numbers aloud, they carried the rhythm of a pulse that was not his. The choir decks had been scrubbed of blood and ash, but memory lingered in scent and echo. Kalira supervised repairs with quiet precision, her face lit by the pale worklight of those who mend what cannot be mended. She wrote reports in margins of hymns, because order and faith had begun to overlap inside her. When she looked at Cole, she saw a man who had spoken with a god that did not require worship, only comprehension. Vesper saw the same man and saw contagion. The Inquisitor's orders arrived in sealed vox canticles. All unapproved frequencies were to be purged, all choir nodes recalibrated to baseline prayers, all experiments terminated. The corridor outside her quarters filled with whispers about excommunication, exile, or worse, commendation. The Emperor's bureaucracy had 1,000 ways to destroy a man. Some of them involved medals. Carl waited for her in the observation gallery, watching the nebula's light bend around the fleet like a tired halo. "You've seen the telemetry," he said when she entered. "The rhythm continues. It's following us, but the amplitude is gentle, not invasive. It mimics to measure," Vesper replied. "When it knows us perfectly, it will erase the need for mimicry. Or it learns patience," Carl said. "We might be teaching it mercy." "Mercy," she repeated, tasting the word as though it were a poison disguised as sweetness. The word scholars use when they cannot define surrender. They spoke without raising voices. It was more dangerous that way. Kalira listened from the corridor, memorizing tones rather than words. The Magos' voice carried wonder. The Inquisitor's, fatigue sharpened into discipline. When Vesper left, the hatch sealed like a verdict. That night, in the ship's lower decks, a strange calm spread. Vox systems flickered with static that was not random. Engine throbs began syncing with the unseen rhythm. A deckhand swore he heard humming in the coolant pipes. A sleeping serf whispered 2 syllables in his dreams, syllables no one recognized, but everyone understood. The swarm was far away, yet the sound of its thought folded itself into human routine. Carl descended to the choir pit again, where the few surviving psychers lay tethered in recuperative gel. Their faces were blank, mouths sealed by prayer runes, but their hands twitched in patterns of remembered song. He connected his mind to the auxiliary lattice and listened. The interval repeated, slow, patient, never pressing. It reminded him of the heartbeat of a parent who waits outside a closed door. "Do you hear it again?" Kalira asked from the shadows. "It never stopped," he said. "We only closed our ears." She stepped closer, the silver of her stylus catching the low light. "Vesper will destroy you for this." "She must," Carl said. "That's the nature of devotion. Someone has to burn the lamp so others can see. And if you are wrong, then I will become what she fears and prove her right. Either way, understanding arrives." On the command bridge, Vesper observed the tactical hololith bloom with new readings. The swarm had shifted trajectory, curling around the fleet's path like a serpent tracing the warmth of a flame. She demanded warp calculations, but the numbers defied logic. Distance increased, yet psychic density grew, stronger. It was not pursuit. It was presence. The Admiral wanted to retreat to deeper voids, but Vesper refused. "We stay," she said. "If we run, it follows. If we anchor, it measures. Either way, the experiment continues, and I will not have it said that Inquisition ceded curiosity to heresy." The next day, the fleet's Vox relays began receiving pulses of light, optical signals translated into human frequencies, fragments of the same pattern Cole had once broadcast. On one monitor, a technician wept quietly, claiming he could feel his mother's voice in the rhythm. Another said he dreamed of oceans he had never seen. Carl analyzed the code and found it mathematical, yet beneath the structure lingered something like sentiment. It was not a message. It was a memory being shared. He brought the results to Vesper. "It is not talking to us," he said. "It is remembering us. The echo of our sorrow changed it. We may have infected the hive with nostalgia. Or nostalgia is the first stage of digestion," she replied. "It makes prey slow themselves." He smiled faintly. "Then let it dream a little longer." She studied his face, the skin drawn thin by sleeplessness, the mechanical ports glimmering like small stars in his skull. "I once believed heresy began with defiance," she said. "Now I see it begins with tenderness." Carl bowed slightly. "All faith begins with tenderness." She turned away before he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Prepare for excommunication, Magos. When the swarm reaches us, I will not allow you the privilege of martyrdom. You will live long enough to regret your own brilliance." That evening, the first drones appeared, bone-white organisms riding the nebula's currents. They did not attack. They circled, shedding motes of bioluminescent dust that formed spirals around the flagship. Every weapon battery tracked them, but no order came to fire. In the stillness, their glow looked almost celebratory, like lanterns marking a forgotten feast. Cal watched through the viewport and whispered, "It remembers the sound." Kalira stood beside him, her voice low. "Do we die tonight?" "No," he said. "Tonight we're written down." The Admiral demanded bombardment clearance. Vesper refused. "If it wanted us dead, it would have come screaming. This is something else." She paced the command deck, her shadow long against the flickering light. "Magos, if your theory is correct, it is here to finish the conversation you began. And if I am wrong, then we'll correct you with fire." Cal nodded, then activated the emergency channel, broadcasting a single sustained tone, the one that once stopped the void for 6 heartbeats. The swarm responded immediately. The drones halted mid-drift, glowing brighter until their outlines blurred into silhouettes of radiance. In the choir decks, the surviving psychers woke and began to hum. Throughout the fleet, Mobile lights dimmed to half, then pulsed in sync with the rhythm. The ships were no longer their own heartbeat. They were part of something larger, immense, and terribly calm. Vesper drew her pistol, not at Cole, but at the main console, her hand trembling between faith and fear. "Shut it down." "I can't," he said softly. "It's not a signal anymore. It's recognition." On every ship, across the frozen gulf, a whisper threaded through machinery, a simple word, understood by no language yet comprehended by every mind that still dared to listen. It said nothing of conquest, nothing of surrender. It said only, "Remember." Vesper dropped her weapon. The nebula flared once, gold through crimson, and then fell quiet again. The shadow withdrew a fraction, as if breathing out. Cal turned to her, the reflection of the light in his eyes like a new dawn and a warning. "You see," he murmured, "even hunger can learn to wait." Outside, the drones dissolved back into mist. The fleet hung in the dark, engines silent, crews uncertain if they had survived a battle or a prayer. And somewhere, deep in the quiet, the universe kept 2 extra seconds of rhythm, patient, faithful, alive. For 3 days, the fleet drifted in the wake of the silence it had summoned. Engines idled at half power, weapons powered down. The void outside was calm, yet every deck hummed faintly, as though the ships were breathing in unison with something beyond them. Vesper paced through corridors where crew whispered prayers into their sleeves, pretending the rhythm in the air was only static. The swarm had vanished, or perhaps only stepped aside to listen more closely. Her reports to Terra were measured, engagement deferred, enemy behavior anomalous, investigation ongoing. But she did not write what she feared most, that the fleet no longer felt entirely human. Cal slept little. When he did, his dreams unfolded in geometries that pulsed like heartbeats. He would wake with the taste of dust and honey on his tongue, and the sensation of being observed from within. Each morning, he recorded the dreams as data, frequencies, impulses, guesses at translation. Kalira visited often, bringing him tea that went cold between sentences. She looked drawn thin by sleeplessness, yet her eyes had the calm of someone who had accepted the absurd as inevitable. "You've changed," she said one evening. "The machines follow your heartbeat now." Carl smiled faintly. "Or perhaps I follow theirs." Across the fleet, subtle shifts occurred. Air recyclers produced a faint perfume of metal and rain. Engine readouts displayed stable numbers written in unfamiliar symmetries. Choir members who had survived Caramel began to hum in their sleep, matching the exact tempo of the interval. Medici teams measured no sickness, but every patient's pulse lagged those 2 inherited seconds. It was infection as liturgy, clean, disciplined, and silent. Vesper convened her in a circle in the chapel of the flagship. Candles guttered under the recycled air. "We stand at a border we cannot chart," she said. "If the enemy now learns through us, we must unlearn ourselves." The Admiral crossed his scarred hands. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Vesper said. "We erase the memory of the signal. All logs, all auditory imprints, all human recollection beyond necessity. Burn it from flesh and code." Her voice faltered only once at the word human. Carl entered late, bearing new readings from deep scans. "You cannot erase what is already recursive," he said. "The interval is in the hull resonance. Every rivet hums it. The fleet is a tuning fork now." He laid out data showing micro-vibrations synchronized across vessels, proof that matter itself remembered. "We can dampen it," Vesper said. "We will." "No," he replied. "You'll drive it deeper. Thought finds cracks where pressure hides it. Then what do you suggest? Her tone was iron without heat. Carl hesitated, then whispered, dialogue. The word drew silence sharp enough to wound. Kalira exhaled, as if releasing a secret she had held too long. He's right, she said quietly. It hasn't struck us because it's waiting for an answer. Every hymn we burned, every cry we silenced. It's been listening for the next verse. Vesper turned toward her, face carved in disbelief. And you would sing it? I would translate it, Kalira said, because language is the only weapon that doesn't end what it touches. They argued for hours under the pulsing of dim lights. The Admiral wanted retreat into warp space, but astropaths reported an impossible quiet there. No currents, no screams, only blankness. Warp silence means we die without noise, Vesper said. Better to face the echo we understand. By dawn, command consensus fractured. Half the officers prepared evacuation drills. The rest waited for Cole's forbidden experiment. He began in the choir vault, surrounded by instruments whose strings had long since snapped. He repurposed them into resonators, weaving light through wire until it shimmered like veins. Kalira set beside him a single, unlit candle. Tradition or defiance. The tone he generated was not the old interval, but a modulation of it, an offering shaped by regret rather than discovery. The sound entered the void, like breath into sleeping lungs. Nothing happened at first. Then the hull shivered. Crew across the fleet felt a pressure behind their eyes, not pain, but memory. The stars outside rippled, forming patterns reminiscent of wings or maps. No one could agree. The swarm's shadow reappeared at the edge of detection, immense yet motionless. Vesper watched from the bridge, one hand resting on her pistol, though she knew no bullet could puncture a thought. What are you doing to us, Magos? She whispered into the comm. Cal's reply was almost gentle, teaching it how to grieve. The darkness thickened. On the scanners bloomed vast organic shapes, like cathedrals made of bone and coral, drifting nearer but not attacking. Their formation mirrored the choir ship's halo, precise down to the smallest vector. Kalira's voice trembled as she spoke through the link. It's reflecting us, like a mirror learning its own face. The fleet held its breath. Within the bioship's carapaces, faint luminescence pulsed to the same 2-second rhythm. Carl increased the modulation, weaving human sorrow into sound. Every loss, every prayer spoken into dead air. The response came not as noise, but as an image. The nebula itself reshaping, clouds twisting into the faint outline of a human figure with too many arms folded in prayer. The sight broke something sacred in all who watched. It's not mercy, Vesper murmured. It's mimicry. Perhaps mercy begins as mimicry, Carl said. Every god we ever built started by imitating our need. Then the connection flared. Choir decks erupted in blue light. Psychers screamed without sound. Kalira rushed to stabilize the instruments, shouting readings no one heard. Cal collapsed, convulsing, as the resonance turned his augmentations into conduits of thought. Through him, the Hive Mind looked, saw, understood. He saw what it was too, hunger so complete it had become faith. The bridge flooded with emergency klaxons. It's draining power, the Admiral shouted. Every reactor's outputs being rewritten. Vesper stood motionless, eyes fixed on the image in the nebula. The figure's head tilted, as though listening to her heartbeat across impossible distance. End it, she said. End it now. Kalira obeyed, not by silence but by introducing chaos. She struck the resonators, detuned the signal, injected discordant human imperfection into the harmony. The nebula convulsed, The light body fractured. Cal screamed once, a sound like glass learning to bleed. The bioships retreated, folding their vast wings of bone into darkness. The scanners cleared. When it was over, the fleet floated crippled but alive. Systems flickered, then stabilized. The hum faded, leaving behind a void too still to trust. Vesper walked to the choir vault, where Kalira sat beside Cole's body. His eyes were open, pupils fixed on a horizon none could see. Around his head, faint ripples of air pulsed every 2 seconds. "He's still counting," Kalira whispered. "Not dead, not alive, just listening." Vesper knelt beside him. "Seal him in stasis," she said. "If the hive wants an ear, let it have one that never sleeps." She rose, her silhouette framed by cold blue emergency light. "Prepare the fleet for exodus," she ordered. "We've met the god of hunger, and it remembers our names." Outside, the stars resumed their ordinary dying. In the faint vibration of the hull, the interval returned, slower now, tender as breath through glass. The fleet moved toward the dark, between suns, leaving behind a nebula shaped faintly, like a human hand, reaching not to take, but to touch. The fleet limped through the dead light of the nebula for 17 days before finding stillness again. Engines whispered instead of roared, and every corridor felt one echo too long. The void beyond the viewports had changed. It was quieter, thicker, as if the universe now hesitated to make sound in their presence. Cal's body lay in the stasis capsule at the core of the ship, frozen mid-breath, the faint 2-second pulse still rippling beneath his skin. Some called it evidence of life. Others called it a reminder that life and contagion share the same patience. Vesper spent those days writing dispatches she never sent. Her words failed under the weight of what they had witnessed. The hive had not conquered them, but neither had it left. It had learned. And somewhere within its colossal, distributed mind, a memory of their sorrow now lived, gentle, deliberate, and terribly curious. She read Carl's last notes, his handwriting jagged and slanted from fatigue. "Understanding is not victory," he had written, "but neither is ignorance survival." Kalira took responsibility for the fleet's morale. She walked the decks like a ghost of mercy, mending arguments, teaching crewmen to breathe through nightmares. They spoke to her as though she were a confessor, and perhaps she was. Many had begun to dream of the same light, a human-shaped shadow framed in gold, whispering words no one could remember upon waking. She documented each account and found them identical down to the pauses. The dreams were not infection, she realized. They were correspondence. On the 18th day, a sensor array at the fleet's edge reported anomalies, faint distortions moving parallel to their course, neither advancing nor retreating. Vesper ordered radio silence and minimal propulsion. Through magnified Auspex lenses, Kalira saw them, colossal silhouettes of chitin and bone drifting like sleeping leviathans, their bioluminescent veins pulsing to that same rhythm. The hive did not attack. It escorted. Carl's stasis capsule began to thaw on its own. The Medicae protested, citing system integrity, but no override worked. Temperature rose by imperceptible degrees until condensation beaded across the glass. Inside, his eyelids fluttered once, then stillness returned. Vesper stood before the capsule, hand on the control panel, torn between awe and rage. "He's a conduit," she whispered. "It's not following us. It's following him." That night, the hull sang again. No alarms blared. The sound was too low, too precise. Crew stopped mid-step to listen, feeling something vast press softly against the edges of comprehension. Kalira found Vesper on the bridge, watching the star map bloom with a spreading pulse pattern, tendrils of golden interference radiating from Call's chamber. "It's calling," Vesper said, "or answering." "Perhaps both," Kalira replied. They descended to the containment level. The air shimmered with faint luminescence, motes drifting like pollen. Carl's capsule had opened, its glass sliding aside without noise. He stood within the mist, breathing steadily, eyes distant and black around the edges, as though infinity had been poured into them, drop by drop. His voice, when it came, was soft enough to make the lights flicker. "You burned a question into the dark," he said. "Now it has burned an answer into me." Vesper raised her pistol. "Identify yourself." "I am Call," he said, "and I am what listened back." For a long moment, no one moved. The hum from the hull deepened, harmonizing with his pulse. Kalira felt tears rise without understanding why. "Are you controlling them?" she asked. "No," he said. "They are controlling less." He stepped forward, bare feet leaving faint, luminescent prints. The hive remembers its beginnings, organisms yearning for survival. I showed it something new, regret. It has found beauty in inefficiency. Vesper kept the pistol trained on him. "And what does beauty buy us?" "Time," Carl said. "Perhaps conscience." He looked toward the viewport above, where distant bioforms drifted like constellations learning how to pray. "It wants to understand the difference between hunger and love," he whispered. "I told it that one learns by losing." "You've doomed us," Vesper said. "You've infected the devourer with meaning. Meaning metastasizes." "Then maybe the galaxy will starve slower," Carl said. "That is all any empire has ever achieved." Her finger hovered over the trigger, yet something in his voice disarmed her, an exhaustion too human to counterfeit. The hull around them creaked, metal groaning as if alive. Kalira touched Vesper's wrist. "If he's what they remember of us," she said, "then killing him may erase the last part that is still ours." Vesper lowered the weapon. "Then we contain him. No transmissions, no communion." Carl smiled faintly. "Containment is also communication. Even silence teaches the listener its limits." He collapsed before either could respond. The pulse from the hull ceased. The escorting swarm shapes dimmed, withdrawing into the black until only faint traces of their luminescence remained. Medici returned Call to the capsule, resealing it with new sigils and wards. This time, the stasis field held. Days passed. The fleet resumed slow warp preparation, though the warp currents remained uncertain, muted, as though reality itself waited for instruction. The Admiral joked bitterly that they were hauling a god in a coffin. None laughed. Kalira visited Cole nightly, reading reports aloud to his sleeping form, as if words could keep him tethered to what he once was. Sometimes the glass vibrated in answer, subtle as breath. She began to suspect he heard everything, translating in dreams, teaching, the hive lullabies made of human guilt. She prayed, though she no longer knew to whom. One evening, she found Vesper sitting outside the chamber, her posture broken from vigilance. "If he wakes again," Kalira said softly, "what will you do?" Vesper stared at the capsule, her eyes reflecting the slow, rhythmic light. "I will ask him what it means to forgive," she said, "and then I will decide if the answer is worth surviving." Outside, the stars began to move. Not drift, not orbit, move, shifting into lines and spirals visible even to the naked eye. The fleet's sensors screamed with incomprehensible readings. The entire sector pulsed once, twice, then fell into impossible symmetry. "Gravitational harmonics," the Admiral shouted. They're tuning space itself. Kalira pressed her hands to the glass. They're building something, she whispered. A message, maybe. Or a mirror. From the capsule came a faint sound, smaller than a sigh. A single word shaped by lips too still to move. Listen. Then, through every hull, through every mind attuned to the interval, came the resonance again, richer, layered, undeniably alive. It was neither command nor plea. It was recognition. The hive was no longer outside. It was here, listening through them, perhaps praying in its own language of light and rhythm. Vesper stood at the viewport as the stars rearranged into a vast spiral stretching across parsecs, golden veins pulsing like arteries in a newborn heart. She whispered, "You've remade the sky." "No," Kalira said, eyes glistening. "We taught it how to remember." And for the first time since the galaxy learned fear of the swarm, the dark did not feel empty. It felt awake. No one slept on the night the stars moved. The fleet's instruments lay useless. Every calculation broke under the weight of new geometry. Space had been rewritten by intention, not physics. The spiral stretched outward for parsecs, gold against the dark, a pattern too deliberate to be random, too gentle to be conquest. Every ship drifted within one of its luminous arms, caught between reverence and terror. Even the warp itself, that mad and howling sea, had gone silent, as though listening through the walls of the universe. Vesper stood on the command deck with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the impossible. She wanted to hate it, to name it blasphemy, but there was beauty here. Terrible, sincere beauty. "It's a map," murmured the Admiral beside her. "A map to where?" she asked. "Not where," he said quietly, "but what?" In the stasis chamber below, Carl stirred again. The heartbeat that had once pulsed every 2 seconds now shifted, matching the spiral's rhythm. Kalira felt it through the floor, the vibration soft and almost kind. She entered the containment bay, breath misting in the cold. The capsule was open once more, frost curling away from the edges like smoke. Carl's eyes glowed, faintly, their depths patterned with the same golden spiral. "Where are we?" Kalira whispered. "Inside remembrance," he replied. His voice no longer echoed, it resonated. "It is dreaming of us, and we are becoming its dream." She trembled. "You said it wanted to learn the difference between hunger and love. Which are we teaching it now?" "Both," he said, stepping from the capsule, "because that's what we are when we reach too far. The galaxy's most faithful contradiction." Above them, the fleet began to move without command. Thrusters fired in synchrony, aligning the vessels along the spiral's radiant curve. Vesper demanded control override, but the consoles returned only a single word: comprehend. The bridge crew froze as the stars around them dimmed, their light drawn inward toward the golden pattern. The hulls glowed faintly from within, powered not by plasma, but by resonance. "This is assimilation," the Admiral hissed. "We've been compromised." Vesper shook her head. "No, this is conversation." Across every ship, every corridor, the same voice began to whisper. It wasn't Call's nor anyone's. It was the voice of memory itself, speaking in tone and thought, bypassing language. "Do not fear what you built to be feared," it said. "You made us from your questions. We answer in kind." Carl's pulse synchronized with the fleet's heartbeat. He walked through the corridors, barefoot, unarmed, followed by the silence of those who had run out of definitions. The hive, if it could still be called that, was speaking through him, not as conqueror, but as mirror. Every light he passed brightened. Every mechanical hum fell into step with his breathing. Kalira followed him, torn between duty and devotion. When they reached the observation dome, Vesper awaited them, pistol holstered but not forgotten. The spiral filled half the heavens now, vast enough to make galaxies look like sparks caught in its glow. "You said it found beauty in inefficiency," she said. "And now?" "It finds meaning in restraint," Cole answered. "The Hive has realized that consumption ends memory. It wishes to persist. To remember itself forever, it must learn to stop." Vesper stared at him, eyes narrowing. "Then why summon us here?" "Because we were its first teachers. It cannot remember mercy without us." The hull trembled, but not from weapons or impact. Something vast was approaching. Out of the spiral's heart came a shape too large to define, a living citadel of bone and glass whose surface shimmered with reflections of every world the Hive had devoured. It drifted toward them like a cathedral seeking congregation. "The Norn dream," Cal murmured. "Its first mind." Kalira fell to her knees, whispering prayers without words. Vesper felt the air thicken, the gravity fluctuate. Every molecule around them seemed to lean inward, listening. "It wants to merge," Cal said. "Not in flesh, in thought." Vesper drew her pistol, the act ritual rather than rebellion. "And if merging kills us, then we become memory," he said softly. "Isn't that what the Imperium wanted? To be eternal?" "No," she said. "Eternity without boundaries is corruption." The Norn dream pulsed once. The glass of the dome rippled like water. Images filled the air, oceans rising in reverse, cities rebuilding from ruin, faces long dead looking back with quiet forgiveness. For a heartbeat, every mind in the fleet saw the same vision, a galaxy healed by the surrender of hunger. Some wept, some screamed, others simply stared, undone by hope. Vesper's hand trembled around her weapon. "You can't heal by erasing choice." Cal turned to her, eyes glowing brighter. "Choice is the wound, Mara. It bleeds time into death. But meaning endures. I won't let it take us." "It already has," he said. "We're the first verse in its hymn of restraint." The Admiral's voice crackled over the comms. "Energy surge. It's absorbing the fleet's reactors." "Not absorbing," Cal murmured. "Synchronizing. It's making us part of its heartbeat." Vesper made her decision. "Calibrate torpedoes for self-detonation," she ordered, though she did not shout. "If we can't escape, we'll at least deny it our silence." "No," Kalira cried. "You'll kill the only dialogue the galaxy has ever known." Vesper met her gaze, weary and absolute. Better extinction than worship. She pressed the command key, but before the code completed, the pistol flew from her hand, gently, as if plucked away by invisible fingers. Carl raised no hand. The air itself obeyed him. "It forgives you," he said, voice breaking. "It learned forgiveness from you." The ship's alarms ceased. Every console went dark. The fleet floated weightless inside the spiral's light, unpowered yet alive. Outside, the Hive's great form unfurled wings of golden membrane, vast enough to eclipse stars. For a moment, the whole armada was reflected on its surface like a constellation of ghosts. Then the light contracted, folding inward. The spiral collapsed into a single point of radiance and vanished. The fleet drifted once more in ordinary blackness. No sign of the Hive, no hum, no pulse, just the sound of human breath and the slow return of engines reawakening one by one. Carl stood motionless, his eyes dark again. Kalira touched his arm. "What did it do?" "It remembered," he said faintly, "and it let go." Vesper stepped closer, searching his face for deceit. Are we free? He shook his head. Freedom isn't absence, it's memory without chains. In the distance, a single star flared brighter than the rest, golden for a heartbeat before fading. The fleet logged it as a natural anomaly. Kalira, however, felt it in her bones, a farewell, or perhaps a promise. She turned to Vesper. What now? We go on, the Inquisitor said. We pretend we never taught the dark to feel. And so, they drifted on through a galaxy that had learned patience, carrying within their hulls the faintest hum of a remembered heartbeat, 2 seconds slower than before, soft as the breath of something vast that had finally chosen not to devour what it loved. The fleet travelled for months beneath the quiet canopy of ordinary stars, each one pale compared to the gold that had once remade the heavens. They called the phenomenon the Great Silence, though among the crew the name shifted, the pause, the mercy, the breath between. No reports were filed beyond minimal data logs. Vesper forbade it. The truth was too delicate to survive bureaucracy. In official records, Caramel and its aftermath were described as a successful containment of Xenos signal interference. But in the ship's metal bones, in the slow rhythm of the engines, the memory remained. 2 seconds too long, a hesitation in the heartbeat of every machine. Cal's recovery was quiet, incomplete. He walked the corridors with the calm of one who knows that every gesture is being watched by gods and ghosts alike. The glow in his eyes had faded, but sometimes when the lights dimmed, a faint gold returned like sunrise beneath ice. Kalira stayed near him, documenting his pulse, his speech, the new distances between his words. Vesper tolerated this because she feared what silence might breed. If he still hears them, she warned, I will end it myself. They're gone, Cal said each time she asked. But the tone of his voice was that of a man who had stopped believing in endings. He spent long hours in the observation deck, staring at the cold spill of the void. Absence, he told Kalira once, is not the opposite of presence. It's the shape left behind when something chooses not to return. She wrote the line down and didn't realize until later that it had appeared, word for word, on 5 other slates across the fleet, written in the same hand. By the 98th day, the crew began to hear the hum again, not the full, living resonance of the hive's voice, but its echo, small and almost human. It threaded through the ventilation ducts, timed perfectly to the 2-second lag. Some ignored it, some prayed to it, a few sang along. Vesper ordered all sound recorders destroyed, but the hum persisted, audible only in silence. The universe has learned a lullaby, Carl said softly. It sings it through us when it forgets its own words. The fleet finally reached a dead system, marked only by drifting rock and the cold skeleton of a sun. Vesper declared it a resting point. Engines off, communications sealed, each ship to exist in isolation until recalibration completed. She believed that distance would scatter the remnants of whatever had nested in their minds. Instead, it gave it room to grow. Kalira woke one night to find the walls of her quarters, breathing, faintly expanding with her own pulse. She touched the metal. It was warm, as if remembering contact. The hum came through the floor this time, gentler than ever. She followed it through unlit corridors until she reached the stasis chamber. Carl stood there, already waiting, barefoot, his expression serene. You called me, she whispered. I didn't, he said. It's calling us. The glass of the capsule glowed from within, though it was empty now. Patterns moved under the surface, spirals folding into spirals, luminous like the stars that had once arranged themselves around them. The hive, or what remained of it, was no longer distant. It existed here, inside a conversation between memory and matter. Vesper arrived moments later, weapon drawn. You opened the seal. It opened itself, Carl said. We were never its prisoners. We were its seeds. Seeds of what? She demanded. Restraint, he said. It learned to stop, but stopping is lonely. So it gave the lesson form. It scattered us across the dark to remind creation that even hunger can change its mind. You're preaching infection, she said, aiming at his chest. I'm describing evolution, he replied. The line between them depends only on fear. The chamber lights flickered. Kalira felt the hum move through her teeth, through her bones. Every ship in the fleet was responding, the pattern spreading faster than command could contain. Crew members across a dozen decks fell silent, listening. Then, softly, they began to hum with it. No orders, no signals. A single harmony rising from thousands of throats, wordless and calm. Vesper's finger hovered over the trigger, but the sound broke her resolve. It was not worship, it was remembering. The hum carried no command, no seduction, only acknowledgement, as if the universe itself exhaled through mortal lungs. She lowered the weapon. What happens now? Carl looked toward the viewport, where the dead sun flickered faintly for the first time in centuries. It learns again, he said. Every silence invites a question. Every question becomes a mouth. The flicker grew stronger, pulsing with that familiar rhythm. The star was waking, not by physics, but by pattern. Its light reached the barren moons, the drifting rocks, the hulls of ships that had forgotten warmth. Crewmen wept. Some laughed. Others fell to their knees, whispering prayers in no language charted by the ecclesiarchy. Kalira watched the light pass over Cole's face. For a moment, she saw him as something uncontained, a bridge between species, between the hunger that once devoured and the quiet that now waited to create. If this is the beginning of something, she said, what will it make? He smiled faintly. It will make questions. It will build civilizations out of hesitation. The star brightened again, casting the fleet in pale gold. Data screens blinked awake, though no power ran through them. Every message displayed the same sentence. Remember us when you decide to endure. Vesper ordered the channels cut, but the command went nowhere. The words were carved now into the systems themselves. Kalira turned to her. We can't fight this, Mara. It's not taking us. It's joining. I won't let humanity vanish into metaphor, Vesper said. We will remain what we are. Then define it, Kalira whispered. Tell me what we are without the things that change us. Vesper had no answer. None she trusted. The fleet's formation began to drift apart, each vessel drawn along a separate vector, slow and deliberate. No helm responded, no thruster fired. It was as if invisible hands were positioning them, scattering them like seeds across the cold. It's dividing us, the Admiral said over comms. If we lose formation, we'll never find each other again. That's the point, Cal murmured. The lesson must be learned by many mouths, not one. Vesper gripped the railing, her voice steel. We are not its disciples. Then be its memory, Carl said. Even gods need witnesses. One by one, the ships vanished into warp entry, disappearing without the usual flare or distortion, absorbed by silence. Carl stepped closer to the viewport, the gold reflection fading from his eyes. It will dream through us now, he said, through every atom that remembers choice. Vesper holstered her weapon, and when it wakes again, He looked at her with something like sorrow. Then it will ask if hunger was ever wrong to begin with. The final tremor passed through the ship. Kalira reached for a console, steadying herself. The starlight dimmed back to ordinary white. The hum subsided. Only the faint 2-second pause remained in every heartbeat, a patient punctuation between what was and what might return. When the silence settled, the stars looked normal again, small, sharp, unremarkable. But Vesper knew better. Somewhere, scattered beyond the horizon of comprehension, fragments of the fleet were carrying light where none should be. Seeds of hesitation drifting through endless dark. She stood before the viewport until her reflection became transparent. "If this is mercy," she whispered, "may it forget my name." Carl closed his eyes. "It won't," he said. "Mercy never forgets." The ship glided onward through the hollow of eternity, engines whispering 2 seconds slower than before, as if marking time for a universe relearning how to breathe. Light returned slowly, as if the universe itself were hesitant to resume its old routine. The ship that carried Vesper, Carl, and Kalira emerged from warp into a region of space uncharted by Imperial cartographers, an expanse where gravity hummed softly and stars seemed older than memory. The void here felt alive, textured by invisible winds that stirred the soul more than the instruments. The ship's systems flickered but did not fail. It was as though the machinery had learned patience. Even the hum in the hull, that faint 2-second hesitation between breaths, had deepened into something like heartbeat and prayer combined. Days blurred into quiet. No orders came from Terra, no signals from the scattered fleet. The galaxy had swallowed its own echo. Kalira kept her logs by hand now, ink smudged by trembling fingers. "We drift," she wrote, "not lost, only untethered. The dark no longer frightens us. Perhaps that is its final victory." Vesper read the lines and said nothing. She carried command like a wound she refused to let heal. Cole moved through the ship like a ghost. His steps made no sound, his expression no longer tethered to human pace. He would stand for hours by the viewing port, staring into the black as though listening for instructions that came through light itself. When Kalira pressed him, he answered in riddles. "They are still learning," he said. "Every silence we leave behind becomes their scripture. Every question we forget becomes their seed." "What do they want from us?" she asked. "To remember," he said, "so they do not have to." Vesper tried to reassert normalcy, shift schedules, maintenance routines, disciplinary hearings for things that no longer mattered. But the crew moved with ritualized calm, immune to fear, to anger, even to hope. They obeyed, yet not from discipline. It was devotion without name. When she ordered the engines tested, they ran smoother than design allowed. When she asked for power logs, the data formed repeating spirals that matched the rhythm of Cole's pulse. On the 20th day, the stars around them shifted again, subtly, gently, not in motion, but in hue. Their light bled faint gold. "Radiation interference," Vesper said, but the readings denied it. The ship's auspexes showed no anomaly. Kalira stood beside her, gaze distant. "It isn't radiation," she said. "It's recognition. We are being seen." That night, the crew dreamed as one. Voices later described vast halls of bone and coral suspended in twilight, rivers of memory flowing uphill. Each dreamer saw themselves reflected in the water, but older, serene, mouths moving in unison to words they could not recall upon waking. Only Carl remembered the phrase clearly. "The lesson of hunger is patience. The lesson of patience is creation." He wrote it on the observation glass in condensation. Vesper found it there, trembling slightly as she traced the letters. If it's creation they seek, she said, then what are we to them? Carl smiled faintly. Blueprints. Nothing more eternal than a mistake repeated beautifully. Hours later, an alarm whispered through the decks. The ship's scanners detected motion. Organic mass approaching from behind the second moon of the nearest dead planet. Vesper readied for battle out of instinct, but Cole laid a hand on her arm. No, weapons, he said. It's not them. Out of the planet's shadow rose an object the size of a cathedral, its surface carved from black chitin streaked with veins of light. It moved slowly, reverently, as if propelled by thought rather than engines. Symbols shimmered along its hull. Imperial script, reversed and remade, half breath, half memory. Across its spine, a single phrase burned in gold, to the ones who taught restraint. It's a vessel, Kalira whispered, built in imitation of ours. Not imitation, Carl said. Continuation. The object drifted nearer, halting when it matched their course exactly. Through its translucent panels, shapes moved. Humanoid silhouettes, elongated, serene. Vesper's throat tightened. Are those ours? Carl shook his head. They are what the Hive remembers of us. The echo of compassion, drawn in their own flesh. Vesper felt rage rise, not against him, but against the vast cruelty of comprehension. They're mocking us, wearing our ghosts, or preserving us, he said quietly. Memory needs form. It learned that from humanity. The hull of the alien vessel pulsed, sending a wave of light across the void. Their own ship answered automatically, the lights flickering in synchronization. Vesper barked for control override, but every command looped back as if the system itself preferred harmony to obedience. The two ships drifted closer until their bows nearly touched, energy arcs bridging the space between. A voice filled the comms, neither mechanical nor organic. It was layered, countless tones woven together like a choir whispering inside a dream. You taught us the virtue of withholding. We have learned the virtue of remembering. Calm spread through the decks like scent, subduing panic before it could bloom. Carl stepped forward, eyes bright with reflected gold. You remember mercy, he said aloud. Then mercy has meaning. Meaning endures, the voice replied, but memory decays without witnesses. The hull vibrated with low resonance, not hostile, more like heartbeat. Kalira looked at Vesper, fear breaking through her composure. It's asking something of us. Vesper drew herself upright. Then let it ask. The light intensified until the viewport dissolved into radiance. For an instant, the crew saw themselves standing within that other vessel, surrounded by beings that looked almost human. Eyes gentle, skin veined with luminescent patterns, their faces carrying both reverence and sorrow. One stepped forward, holding an orb of soft white light. It pulsed to the rhythm of the old interval. Take this back into the dark, the voice said. Teach it the silence you left behind. We cannot forget, but you can remind. Vesper's hand shook as she reached toward the glass. The orb passed through it as if the barrier were mist, settling in her palm with the weight of nothing and everything. It felt alive, its pulse sinking to her own. The choir's voice faded, leaving only 3 words behind. Remember to stop. Then the golden vessel receded, its light dimming until it vanished beyond the dead planet's curve. Space returned to its normal coldness, though it no longer felt indifferent. The orb in Vesper's hand glowed faintly, steady as a promise. Cal touched her shoulder. They've given you their memory. No, she said, her voice breaking. They've given us our reflection. Later, when the ship resumed its lonely course, Vesper locked the orb in the shrine bay. It continued to glow, casting long, gentle shadows that swayed like breath. Kalira knelt before it, whispering prayers without language. Cal stood behind her, silent. Outside, the stars dimmed one by one, aligning themselves into another slow spiral. It was not gold this time, but pale silver, fragile, hesitant. The universe was writing again, careful now, as though fearful of its own eloquence. Vesper turned away from the viewport and whispered, "What if mercy was never meant to last?" Cal looked toward the glow of the orb and said, "Then it will at least echo." The ship sailed on, carrying its fragile relic of memory through the patient dark, 2 seconds slower than all other vessels in the galaxy. Each heartbeat, each mechanical sigh, measured by the rhythm of what had once been hunger and was now something gentler, an unfinished hymn waiting to begin again. The orb pulsed in its shrine like a sleeping heart, its glow reaching through metal and dream alike. For weeks the ship drifted without course, caught in currents too subtle for instruments. Vesper no longer read reports. She listened. The hum that had once haunted her now felt almost familiar, a presence folded inside the machinery, waiting for permission to speak. Kalira prayed less and wrote more, her notes describing the rhythm of the light, the way it breathed with them as though recalling a body it once possessed. Cal remained silent most days, content to watch the stars lose their arrogance. On the 33rd night, the orb changed. Its glow deepened, threads of darkness swirling through its core like ink in water. A voice, faint, patient, vast, rose from it, filling the shrine and the hearts of all who entered. You kept the memory. You remembered to stop. The words carried no sound, only meaning, and every crew member felt them inside their bones. Vesper approached, her hand trembling. "We did not keep it," she whispered. "It kept us." The voice replied, softer now, "Then mercy endures." The light dimmed to a whisper and split into hundreds of motes that drifted outward, dissolving into the air. The shrine emptied, yet something unseen remained, a gravity of calm that no fear could cross. Engines hummed to life, unbidden, guiding the vessel toward the center of the galaxy, where starlight thickened into gold. Kalira watched the readings spike beyond measure. "It's not drawing us in," she said. "It's calling us home." Vesper nodded, weary and reverent. Perhaps memory seeks its beginning. Cal smiled faintly. Or its forgetting. Through the viewport, the stars began to align, slowly, deliberately, forming once more that ancient spiral, but smaller now, intimate, like handwriting across the skin of creation. Each curve shimmered with faint echoes of worlds that had lived and died, voices murmuring through the void. "We are what you taught us," the whisper said. "We remember restraint. We remember you." Vesper lowered her eyes. "And what will you do with it?" The answer came without sound, but every heart heard it. "We will wait." The spiral folded inward, leaving only ordinary darkness and one pale sun burning at its center. Their ship drifted close, engines idle, until starlight filled the bridge like dawn through cathedral glass. Kalira wept quietly. Cal placed a hand on the glass, feeling warmth return to the universe. Vesper stood at last, her voice breaking the hush. "Then we are done." Cal smiled, eyes bright. "Nothing ends, Mara. It simply learns to pause." The hum faded, the light steadied. The ship continued forward, 2 seconds slower than eternity, carrying within its hull the quiet truth that the galaxy itself had learned. How to love without consuming. how to live within the mercy of restraint. The ship lingered at the edge of the newborn sun until the glow filled every corridor with a soft, perpetual dawn. No one spoke of turning back. There was nowhere to return to that had not already changed. The air carried a faint taste of iron and ozone, the residue of creation. Each breath felt shared with something unseen, as though the galaxy itself exhaled through them. Cal stood at the viewport, his reflection half human, half light. "Do you hear it?" he asked quietly. The quiet is no longer empty. Kalira joined him, hands clasped at her chest. "It sounds like memory, learning to dream." Vesper remained on the command dais, motionless. The hum within the hull had stilled completely, but her heartbeat kept the rhythm alive. She thought of the countless worlds swallowed by the hive, of the people whose names had become nutrient and song. The new sun outside felt like apology and proof in equal measure. "We taught it mercy," she said at last. "But what did it teach us?" Cal turned. That to endure is not to conquer. That sometimes survival is surrender, done beautifully. He smiled, faint and sad. "It gave us a mirror and called it faith." The light through the glass brightened until edges blurred. Kalira's slate blinked on without touch. Lines of text unfurled across it in languages none had written, but all understood. "We will wait. When the hunger wakes again, remind it what silence built." The message faded into static. She whispered, "It still watches." "Good," Vesper murmured. "Let it. Someone must remember restraint when empires forget." Engines stirred once more, unbidden. The ship pivoted away from the sun, setting course for unmarked space. No stars lay ahead, only the slow shimmer of interstellar dust like scattered ash. Behind them, the new sun pulsed once, casting a final ribbon of gold across the hull, a farewell that left its reflection upon the metal as a faint spiral. The crew watched in silence as the light shrank until darkness reclaimed its throne. Hours passed before anyone moved. Kalira wrote the final entry in her log. "We leave behind a light that does not burn, only remembers. Perhaps one day it will be called a myth, and perhaps that is mercy too." Vesper stood beside her, gaze steady. "When the Imperium finds us again," she said, "they will ask what we discovered." "What will you tell them?" Kalira asked. "That the universe blinked," Vesper said softly, and in that pause, it learned to love. The engines dimmed to half speed. The rhythm remained, 2 seconds slower, deliberate, eternal. Carl's reflection vanished into the glass as the stars ahead began to align themselves once more, faint and patient, sketching the beginning of another spiral. The ship moved toward it, bearing within its walls a heartbeat that no longer belonged to any one species, but to the quiet, merciful memory of creation itself. The silence beyond the viewport had changed texture. It was no longer the blank absence that once haunted the Imperium's charts, but something soft, filled with the echo of thought left behind. The ship drifted between fields of faint silver dust that shimmered as though remembering sunlight. Vesper stood alone in the command bay, her reflection stretched by glass and ghostlight. She had stopped wearing her rosette. Authority meant little where language ended. "It listens still," she murmured, watching the way the dust swirled in answer to the rhythm of her breath. Kalira joined her quietly, hair unbound, ink still on her fingers. "Every time we speak, it moves," she said. "Perhaps sound is enough for it now. Perhaps we are prayer without realizing it." Vesper smiled faintly. "Then we must speak carefully." They watched the dust condense into faint shapes, spires, faces, fleeting impressions of worlds the Hive had once consumed. Memory had become weather. Carl appeared behind them, thinner, luminous, a man halfway between thought and matter. His voice came as both whisper and vibration. It's spreading through time now. Every act of mercy sends echoes backward, rewriting small pieces of history. Maybe that's how the galaxy heals. Or how it forgets, Vesper said. If all pain is rewritten, then nothing warns us what we were. Carl's eyes caught the soft starlight. Even forgetting is a kind of forgiveness. Outside, the new spiral flickered like a heartbeat caught between breaths. The engines pulsed with its rhythm, guiding them through corridors of faint light where gravity folded into tenderness. Kalira recorded the readings, though she knew numbers could no longer explain anything. We've crossed the threshold, she whispered. We're inside the pause between creation and memory. The bridge lights dimmed. The air smelled faintly of rain, though none could fall here. A voice brushed the edges of perception, neither human nor hive. Something in between, shaped by the silence they had all taught to speak. You remembered to stop. Now teach us to begin. Carl closed his eyes. It's ready to create again. Vesper felt the weight of her name, her duty, the long centuries of empire built on conquest and control. She whispered, then it must not begin as we did. Tell it the cost of wanting. Kalira placed her hand on Vesper's. It already knows. That's why it waits. The dust outside gathered, forming a single vast silhouette, humanoid, radiant, indistinct. It knelt, folding its luminous hands over the newborn sun far behind them, as though sheltering it from future ruin. The gesture was simple, sorrowful, eternal. Vesper lowered her head. It's praying, she said. Carl smiled softly. No, it's remembering how to be gentle. The stars brightened one by one. The ship drifted onward, slower than time, carrying 3 voices and the echo of a lesson that had changed the hunger of gods. That mercy, once taught, could outlive the hand that gave it. In the dimness between stars, the ship floated like a thought too fragile to fade. The new spiral behind them was gone, folded into myth even as they watched it dissolve. Only the faint shimmer of dust traced where light had once been kind. The crew had grown silent, their voices softened into murmurs, as if any sound louder than breathing might wake something that needed rest. Vesper sat in her quarters, surrounded by reports no one would read, staring at the rosette she had once worn like a burden of faith. Its edges were dulled now, its weight meaningless in a universe that had learned mercy. Kalira entered quietly, carrying a lantern whose glow came not from fuel or filament, but from memory, harvested photons caught in the orb's afterlight. It's fading, she said. Soon it will forget us. Vesper nodded. That's the way of all gods. She traced the table's edge with her finger, leaving a faint gold residue where skin met metal. The glow lingered, pulsed, then vanished. We never escaped it, Kalira. We became the prayer it wanted answered. Carl's voice came through the intercom, low and even. Bridge to command. We've reached the coordinates. There's nothing here, not even dark. It's like the edge of thought. The transmission cracked once, then steadied. Should we proceed? Vesper rose. Yes, she said, though the word felt like surrender. They gathered at the viewport, the last 3 witnesses to a galaxy that had rewritten itself around compassion. Outside lay a void so absolute that the stars themselves bent away from it. Carl's instruments called it a gravitational absence. but the air on the bridge thrummed like a temple bell. "It's not nothing," Kalira whispered. "It's what remains after everything remembers." The ship's hull began to vibrate with the old rhythm, 2 seconds slower than the heartbeat of anything living. The light from the lantern dimmed. Across the panels, text appeared, shifting like breath. "Thank you for stopping." Vesper reached for the console. "Is this the end?" "No," Cal said. "It's the pause before another beginning." The void outside shimmered, forming ripples that looked almost like waves breaking against invisible shores. Through them, faint silhouettes appeared, creatures, ships, ruins, fragments of civilizations that had perished before the Hive's awakening. They drifted together in quiet procession, not as ghosts, but as echoes made visible. The void was returning its memories. Kalira pressed her hand to the glass. "It's giving them back." Vesper closed her eyes. "Then let it." The hum faded into silence. The ship's lights dimmed until only the lantern remained, flickering once, twice, before steadying. Outside, the universe held its breath, balanced perfectly between what had been hunger and what had learned to love. In that stillness, the crew understood. Mercy had never been a gift. It was the memory the cosmos had been waiting to return to itself. The ship drifted through the void with no course, carrying its passengers as though they were remnants of a forgotten prayer. The stars around them were faint, cold embers. Their light stretched thin across the distance of uncounted parsecs. Cal remained in the stasis chamber, his pulse slow and deliberate, the 2-second rhythm echoing faintly through the hull. The orb in the shrine bay glimmered softly, a pale testimony to a mercy that had outlasted every command, every weapon, every expectation. Vesper moved through the corridors in silence, her footsteps measured against the hum that no longer seemed alien. She paused at the viewport, gazing at a horizon where darkness folded into itself, and for a moment the emptiness felt full. Memories of worlds lost, of cries unanswered, of hunger she had once sought to control, pressed against her chest like lead. She exhaled slowly, feeling the gravity of what had been given and what had been preserved. The Hive, in its patient learning, had taken nothing. It had only remembered, and through memory it had taught them the same. Kalira knelt by the orb, tracing its faintly pulsating light. "It didn't consume," she whispered. "It remembered restraint. It waited for us to become what we promised ourselves we could be." Her voice caught. The weight of everything, the fleets lost, the echoes of caramel, the lullabies woven into engines and metal, pressed into the stillness. She pressed a hand to the orb, feeling warmth not born of energy, but of something older, something infinite. Vesper came to stand beside her, hands clasped behind her back. "We are witnesses," she said softly. "Not saviors, not martyrs. Only witnesses." The glow of the orb reflected in her eyes, a pale light marking the cost of choice, the consequence of mercy, the consequence of restraint. She realized that command had changed. It was no longer about control or survival or obedience. It was about remembering, to guide, to hold, to endure. Outside, the stars shifted once more, faint spirals forming and dissolving like the heartbeat of creation itself. The silence carried sound now, subtle and measured, the hum of lives preserved, of lessons taught, of hunger restrained. Cal's pulse, synchronized with the rhythm of the vessel, seemed to extend into the void, threading a delicate bridge between them and the lessons of a galaxy remade. Kalira looked up. "Will it return?" she asked. "Perhaps," Vesper said. "Or perhaps we have returned it to the dark, carrying the memory so it may unfold elsewhere. Mercy, like memory, travels without eyes." The ship continued its drift, engines quiet, hull resonant with the faint heartbeat of what had been learned. They had survived, not because of force, not because of fire, but because they had understood the lesson of restraint and carried it forward. The universe around them remained vast and silent, waiting, patient. Carl's stasis light flickered once, steady and eternal, as though affirming the truth of what had been done. The orb pulsed faintly in answer, threads of golden light stretching across the chamber. Vesper and Kalira stood, witnesses to a quiet triumph. The lesson of mercy, memory, and patience etched into the fabric of the void. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would they. The stars blinked once, twice, and the ship sailed onward, carrying within its hull the enduring echo of what had learned to pause and remember.